This is our lecture on personality. For some odd reason, this is one of my favorite lectures, and I'm not really sure why. Perhaps because it tends to get a lot of reaction out of the students and gives a lot of possible discussion. Because everybody has a personality, or at least one hopes everybody has a personality. Think about your personality for a minute. How would you describe it? Would your friends agree with your description? Would your parents? If not, whose opinion should we trust on the matter? Can our personality change based on the situation? What would be the best way to be objective about our personality? This is just a little bit of ways to get us really thinking about all of this. For some of you, you might know what your personality is, and that personality is certainly what your friends would agree that it is. For others, you might say your personality is very different from what your parents would think, your friends would think, etc. And of course, some people might see that it's very different depending on the situation. And, well, which one of us is actually correct? Of course, some people may think that we are very, very different from how we perceive ourselves, such as in this joke. Why did the introverted mushroom decide to go to more parties? Because everyone told him he was a fun guy. We absolutely love personality tests. It's just part of our nature, I guess. We are so into these personality tests, including online personality tests, that Facebook at one point had to actually ban certain types of personality tests because people were using Facebook to spread information which allowed for data mining, which caused some issues with some of the elections. And that is just part of the fact that we really, really like them. You can still, of course, take personality tests to find out all sorts of things about yourself. I'm sure before you signed up for this class, you had no idea that I was Mr. Spock, a crab, a stegosaurus, an amethyst, Ravenclaw, INTJ. You know, it confuses me about the Dalmatian. I've never owned a Dalmatian, but apparently I'm a Dalmatian. And for those of you who like the Vampire Chronicles, I'm apparently David Talbot. I would have assumed one of the others, like Marius or something, but David Talbot. Although my husband says he can see it. All of you guys, I'm sure, have taken one or more of these type of things, although maybe not these specifically. But this is just because we really, really love them. But the question is are they really accurate? So are they accurate? I guess we'll find out.
Now, when you first meet me, you might not realize that my personality matches iced coffee, that my mental age is 71 years old, that I'm an ENFP, or I'm also a greyhound. If I was running, I guess it would be more obvious. We're fascinated with this idea of personality typing, but throughout history it's been fraught with junk science and results that can't be replicated. So are all personality tests just wrong? Now, we've tried to explain personality from using everything from lumps on your head to your birthday. The signs of the zodiac are a surprisingly common way of personality typing, by trying to group people according to the month you're born. But we know it's not science. In a paper published in 2003, scientists looked at over 2,000 babies. Many were born at the same time on the same day. They called them time twins, and their development was monitored for decades. The research looked at things like anxiety, IQ, sociability, and even marital status, all things that astrologers claim to read on a birth chart. but they didn't have similar personalities, and astrologers who attempted to read their signs did no better than chance. Everyone grew up into their own unique personality, and the stars had nothing to do with it. Some early psychologists took a different approach. So you may have heard of Carl Jung, who looks very serious, and had the idea you could describe an individual's personality based on where they fell on 4 spectrums: the thinking spectrum, the feeling spectrum, the sensation spectrum, and the intuition spectrum. Later, Briggs and Myers adapted this idea into the Myers-Briggs type indicator. There are 8 personality characteristics in 4 either-or pairs. So you're either an introvert or an extrovert. You either sense or intuit things. You're either thinking or feeling, perceiving or judging. This means there are 16 personality types and ways that everyone can view or interact with the world. And it's also not scientifically sound. Ideally, on a personality test, you would see consistent results over time. But when a bunch of people took the Myers-Briggs test twice, 5 weeks apart, about 50% of them were a different personality type the second time around. But more importantly, the Myers-Briggs test doesn't have any real predictive power. Studies looking at how people respond in different situations found that your choices and behavior can't be explained by your Myers-Briggs type. Neither can how you perform in a job, what types of jobs you choose, or what you're like in relationships. So screenshot this and send it to the next person you come across with their Myers-Briggs type in their dating profile. Factors like agreeableness and conscientiousness are better indicators, which brings us to the Big Five. It's the most accurate personality test according to science and looks at 5 main traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Everyone has each of these 5 traits to some degree, but the extent of these traits varies from person to person. Rather than lumping everybody into one of 12 or 16 groups, this type of test looks at where we fall on a spectrum of personality. Compared to any other personality test out there, the Big Five gives the most consistent and valid results, meaning it has the ability to predict how you'll behave in the workplace or in relationships. Screenshot this and send it to your crush with no context. We're fascinated with the idea of personality types because we want to understand how we're similar and different and how we all fit into the world. But you're not a static type, and there's no evidence that tests like Myers-Briggs are accurate. What we can see is where you sit on a spectrum of personality traits. And this can be powerful because your personality traits can influence your well-being. People who are more agreeable and conscientious, for example, tend to experience higher life satisfaction and report feeling happier more often. But research has also found that your well-being can influence your personality traits. So if you want to be more agreeable and conscientious, you can try to boost your well-being by practicing gratitude, as well as visualizing your best possible self. So I'm sure it's not a big surprise to hear that easy online personality tests are wrong. But remember that the Big Five is the most scientifically sound. It can tell you some things about who you are, but more so, you can use it to shape who you want to become.
I love how she's drinking her coffee again at the at the end of that. So, what you said about Myers-Briggs, completely accurate. Before I transitioned, you could actually watch mine vary depending on certain parts of my life and what was going on. They would always 3 weeks out of every month I would be an INTJ, and the other one I would become an ISTJ. Never did understand that one. We all know basically what that personality is. It is that a characteristic way that people differ from one another. And we divide these things out by personality traits, which are those basic dimensions on which people differ. There are a few criteria which define basically a trait, and we're about to get into that in just 1 second. We have the 3 criteria on which a personality trait is judged. The first one is consistency. It has to be consistent with home, work, and in public and private spheres. If it's not consistent, it's not really part of that personality trait. Now, that doesn't say that you can't act differently, home, work, or whatever, but that might not necessarily be specifically a trait, or that trait would still be present. It's just you're trying your best to suppress it. So if somebody is very, very introverted at home, but is very, very extroverted at work, well, which one is how they really act? It's really hard to say because there is no consistency. So we might not want to use that as part of their personality traits. Now, if they're kind of funny, with humor, work, and everything else, well, then that could be part of that person's personality trait. Another thing is that these personality traits will tend to be fairly stable. A very wise man I know actually said that kids aren't people until they're 30 or something like that. And that's because to some extent our personality is kind of really adjusting until we're in their 20s and 30s. And that's partly just because our brain's not there yet. But from there, you're going to know when your personality is starting to develop, and when it's still going to adjust from time to time, but you'll have a good concept of what your personality is, usually in your 20s. And it is going to mostly remain stable throughout your life. There are going to be some things that might improve or get worse, but it will have a tendency, many things have a tendency of being fairly stable. Or if they do change, it's not going to be just you. It might be something that all people that age will act like, such as you get older, you will tend to become more conscientious. That's not just you, it's the entire group of people your age. There's also a thing that they must have some form of individual difference. All of us have very, very different ideas of what's important. All of us are very different as far as whether we're willing to try new experiences or do our work. Some people refuse to take notes because they just don't care. Others refuse to turn in paperwork that they need to do. Meanwhile, everybody is able to do whatever they need to do. Others are like, oh my goodness, I must get things in early. All of those things are very, very individual differences. In the early days of assessing personality traits, of course, outside of phrenology, which is the bumps on the head, people wanted to get a scientific study, but they have to understand what it is that we should be looking for. Somebody, and I don't know who it is, my apologies, took a dictionary, large dictionary, and went through 18 to 20,000 words that could be used to describe somebody's personality. That would be a very long test if we chose to do all of those at once in one simple test. But he looked at all these several thousand words, many thousand words, and wanted to see if he could narrow it down. And he found words that kind of correlated with each other. For example, friendly and sociable can probably go together pretty well. Something like vain and arrogance might as well. So vain and arrogant are both on there as well, although not highlighted. And by doing this, he was able to get it down from 18 to 20,000 to a somewhat more reasonable number. And from there, we have really looked at building the tests to see if we could accurately assess any one of those things. When we do personality assessments, we have several little areas that we look at. We can look at an objective reporting, which is very, very easy to do. We can do that with either a self-report or an informant report. We can assess certain parts of the personality, usually the traits, because anytime you're assessing one of these traits, it's actually much more complicated than one would think. So realistically, we're just doing a whole bunch of traits, and then I guess you can build them into a personality. You can also look at some type of projective test like the TAT or the Rorschach. Those are all possibilities as well if you're going to look. We're going to do implicit tests, and of course behavior and performance measures. That's how we test all of these different things. And we're going to go into each one of them individually. The first one are objective tests, and I'm fairly certain we're all very familiar with what an objective test is. You've got standardized items, and it's very, very easy to score, very standardized. The thing here is that's a Scantron sheet. We all are familiar with these things, and I can hand out all of a whole bunch of basically Scantrons effectively, and I can assess a personality that way, or at least parts of a personality that way. We're all very familiar with those types of tests. But there's also this other thing called a self-report, and it has a lot of advantages. The idea is that you basically know yourself better than anybody. It's cheap and it's easy. It's much easier for me to hand out, maybe to the 20 people I have in my class and get information. Imagine how hard it would be if I had to reach out to other people. When they do surveys, the personality surveys on the SONA systems for grad students, usually they are going after a self-report. Otherwise, it would just be kind of ridiculous. But there are some disadvantages. There are. One, if things are high stakes, it's entirely possible that somebody may choose to not give the full information. When you're going off and getting a job interview, and some of you are going to have already had situations like this, sometimes it is better to not give the full truth if it's a really, really juicy job. If the job is $200 an hour, as opposed to whatever it is, $7, $8 at McDonald's, you may really want to lie to get into that spot. It's just how that is. Of course, you also might simply think really good of yourself, which, given I've seen a lot of students, a lot of them really think they are much better than anybody else. And so they also are just more likely to go after that, as well. And then there's also the situation called the reference group effect. And what happens frequently in the reference group effect is you're comparing yourself to some other group. Now, how accurate is that other group's reference? Are they an extreme or are they normal? Okay, so I'll give you an example of this. I used to work for a radio show in San Francisco. Actually, it was Tiburon, which is right next to San Francisco. And I'm kind of a moderate person. Now, when you compared me to the people in San Francisco, they thought I was extremely conservative. However, once I got into the studio, because the job I was in, everybody was a Republican, very, very conservative Republican. I was very much of the extreme liberal in there. I was practically a communist. So how I thought of myself in that situation could depend on what group I was in. Was I a super liberal, which is what David would have said, or was I the super Republican or whatever, which is what the people in San Francisco believed? That's what the problem is with, another problem is with self-report. You're always comparing yourself to somebody, and you don't know if they're an extreme or not. San Francisco is an extremely liberal town, and it was the radio station. How conservative was the radio station? There's another option here, and there is this thing called an informant report. For any of you guys who were diagnosed with ADD under the age of 7 or whatever, back when you were still in elementary, middle, or whatever, they mostly relied on informant reports. They probably asked your teachers to give information about how you acted in class. They certainly asked your parents to do similar, and that's how they rated your diagnosis. My kid is 17. I just had to do an informant report on her for something that she needed. Other people that you can use for the informant report could be friends, roommates, spouses, kids. So yes, your own children, bosses. It could be any one of those people. Anybody who, well, honestly, basically isn't you. But this has a set of drawbacks as well. So while it's great, it tends to be valid because they see how you're really acting in a more objective manner. You can certainly combine it with the self-report. That works well. And it does give a really good sample of behavior because now you see how somebody says that they're rating themselves and how other people say similar. But it does have its problems. One, limited access. If SONA, the studies on SONA, were asking for your parents to do things and have them submit a survey, that would be challenging. They're probably not going to get it. If you look at if you're a parent, you may also experience something called a sibling contrast effect. In the sibling contrast effect, let's say you have a couple of kids. You got 2 kids, okay? One of them is a kind of a normal kid, and then the other one's this super diligent, conscientious person. All the paper, everything is like almost to an extreme of how good this kid is. So let's say the normal kid, more normal kid, you have to do something on them. But if you're contrasting this kid who might be completely normal, again, in comparison to the sibling who's everything's done, exactly when they're supposed to do it or early, the room is spick and span, and is basically super child, how is that going to reflect on the more normal kids? You're probably going to assume that the normal kid is lazy because they're not acting like their sibling, even though they're acting kind of normal. That's basically what this sibling contrast effect is. Letter of recommendation effect. Well, if you ask somebody for a letter of recommendation, they are going to have this tendency of grading you higher than they might otherwise be. Give you. That's not always the case, but it can be a case. And then there's also this concept of the honeymoon effect. So it was named, of course, for people who are just on their honeymoon, and they think really, really highly of their spouse because, they're so deeply in love and you haven't noticed all the little annoying things yet that are certainly going to creep up eventually. But that can also make an effect on people. These objective tests are great, but are they just looking at a trait or are they actually assessing an entire personality? Personalities are way more complex than a single trait would be. And traits also interact with each other to create how people act in certain scenarios. If you can only get a few traits well, you might only be able to get a few traits in order, and it might be really hard to do that entire personality. Traits alone a test can be anywhere from 5 minutes to a couple of hours just to assess one trait, and you have multiple traits that build into a personality. Some objective tests include the Big Five inventory. This is also called OCEAN, so you could hear it called either way. And we're going to return to that one later on in the lecture. You also have ones called Hexaco, which is basically like the Big Five, but it adds one additional trait. And NEO PI3, whatever it is. They take the Big Five and then actually divide out more of them into more facets. So it's probably a little bit more easy to get more information out of. Now we're going to move on to projective tests. I want you to just look at this for a second and answer the question. What is this? Some people may see various things in this. Faces, animals, angels potentially. Personally, the first time I saw this, I saw a Goomba from Super Mario Brothers. I'm not sure what that says about me. What about this one? Can you describe this? Some people may see animals, trees, or a variety of other things as well. Why don't you tell me a story about what is going on here? See a gentleman right here and somebody laying down right there. Could be any one of a variety of things. What do you think? What about this one right here? She's sad? Did she fall? Why for either one of those? Or maybe there's something entirely different. It's kind of hard to say. So what I just showed you were some samples of certain projective tests. And the understanding here is that if somebody is asked to describe or interpret different stimuli, any responses are going to be influenced by, well, something else, frequently something that's subconscious. The first two that you saw were the Rorschach test. Now this test was developed in the 1920s, and originally it was used involving schizophrenia. Not sure exactly why, but that's what it was originally used for, somewhere in the diagnosis of schizophrenia. Now, while it was continued to be used, it really was picked up in the 1960s. And from there, it really got into pop culture. I think everybody has seen something along those lines. And originally, it was only these 10 cards. And then in the 60s or so, more cards were developed. Holtzman developed a list of 45 different cards. And each one had several things that you could grade on and look at. In total, I believe it was like 22 different elements that you could check. They looked at stuff like how long it took you to give an answer. Like the first one was probably slower because you're still getting used to that type of test. And then as you're getting more used to it, it should go faster and faster. So you're not only looking at how long it takes people to say something, but what they're seeing. For example, a lot of people start seeing more sexual images when you get to the later things. That second one I showed you, a lot of people see some type of sexual remarks in that. But not only are they grading you on time, whether sex is present, they could be grading you on several different things or any type of weird thinking. For example, there's one that when I first saw it, it looked like somebody was dancing around an Eiffel Tower with like flowers and stuff. The person who was teaching me the assessment class, I think, started to really worry about me because some of my responses were kind of strange. I think she was really concerned about the flying Goomba I saw in the first one. But that's what this Rorschach thing says. She just kind of gave me weird looks. But these things, are used somewhat. They're not used a lot, but it is known it is known enough that we should probably be aware of it. One that is a little bit more used is this thematic perception test, and that's the third and the fourth one that I showed you. And this is much more used, much more commonly. And this was actually inspired by Moby Dick, the book. And in this situation, you see a photo, sketching, whatever, and you have to create the story, which has to have stuff like a resolution involved. And you find that you try to find out, what is going on in the background. There are several different elements that people do score on when they are using this particular test. Something like 48. It's a lot there. And this perception test not only is used in psychology, but it is also frequently used in business, because some business leaders think that there are some ways of finding out what your potential skills are and what career path you should be on. I don't know, but this is popular. It actually has 7 different scoring methods. Just the most common one has that 48 different elements to look at. So the Rorschach, it does have some predictive ability, but it's not great, as I mentioned. If you do want to find somebody who does that, I've never met a single psychologist who still uses that. I'm sure somebody has it somewhere. Somebody does it. But the thematic perception test has been shown to have a lot of validity. I'm not so sure if it is proven to have validity for what the business leaders were using it for, with the potential skills and career path stuff. I'm not really so sure. But it does help and have a lot of information that we still can use. But it is really, really difficult to score, so I would be really surprised if a lot of people really had some way of really doing that easy. Implicit tests, again, this test, we've discussed this so many times before, this implicit association test, where it's trying to get at your subconscious feelings towards different things. There's also stuff like performance measures, where basically you're going around and, seeing what's actually being measured and how people are actually behaving in the real world. Now, these are great. You're not going to have a response bias. It's simply the researcher doing what needs to be done. It's not that they're getting a response from the person who has their own set of biases. You're not getting it from a parent or teacher, which may have a completely different set of biases. And this is just, we're just walking around in the daily life and just finding out what's actually being done. Now, there are a lot of cons, however. It is more than a little bit of a pain in the butt, and it is incredibly complex potentially. You also may have to find different ways of coding your data, and sometimes that's a little bit more challenging. And once you code the data, then you have to process it, and it can be really problematic. My very first research position was at Zoo Atlanta, and I was basically coding the data, or uncoding the data and transferring it into Excel sheets. And because this is very complex and everything, you really are not going to get the sample size that you really need. If it's one researcher going off and doing whatever they need to do, and just following maybe one or two people for days on end, you're only going to get a certain amount of people, as opposed to if you just did a standardized and objective scoring. So that can be a big problem, depending again on what you're trying to do. The 5-factor model. What we have here is one of the main ways that we assess personality. We mentioned that in the objective tests. That's exactly where it is. And it comes up with 5 factors. The first factor is openness. Second, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Hence why it's also called OCEAN. So this is also very easy to see in movies. And some of y'all may or may not know what you are, or what might be the most dominant. So why don't you look at these guys in the movies and see, well, who you really resonate with.
William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate. Alice, will you kindly pay attention to your history lesson?
I'm sorry, but how could I possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
In this world, perhaps, but in my world, the books would be nothing but pictures.
It's your world. What nonsense. Now,
Nonsense?
once more, from the beginning.
That's it, Dinah. If I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. Nothing would be what it is, because everything would be what it isn't. Contrariwise, what it is, it wouldn't be. And what it wouldn't, it would.
Wingardium Leviosa. No, stop. You're going to take someone's eye out. Besides, you're saying it wrong. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. You do it then if you're so clever. Go on. Wingardium Leviosa. Wingardium Leviosa.
Oh, well done. See here, everyone. Miss Granger's done it.
Come on, y'all. Then I saw her face. Ha ha. Now I'm a believer. Listen. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Hey, I'm in love. I'm a believer. Come on. I believe. Hey, y'all sing it with me. I believe. The people in the back. I believe. Oh, that's funny. Oh. I can't breathe.
All alone, my pet? Why, yes, I am, but...
The little men
are not here?
No, they're not.
Making pies?
Yes, gooseberry pies.
It's apple pies that make the men folks' mouths water.
Oh, they do look delicious.
Yes, but wait till you taste one. Go on. Go on, have a bite.
Stop it, stop it. Go away, go away. Shame on you, frightening poor old lady. There. I'm sorry.
Oh, my heart. Oh, my poor heart. Take me into the house and let me rest. A drink of water, please.
Artu? Where are you? Artu? Artu? Huh? Artu, you're on fire! R2-D2, you found a cigarette. Well, I don't think smoking is grown up at all. Because it's very dangerous. Smoking does dreadful things to your lungs and is very bad for your heart. Well, I know I don't have one, but humans do, and I think we should set a good example. Well done, R2.
I'm sure several of us can relate to at least one of those characters, if not, well, multiple ones. I don't know why they picked C-3PO for neuroticism. I can think of way better characters that I would have picked, and I would have picked some, like one of Woody Allen's characters. All of his characters are neurotic. So one of the first traits is this of that of openness, and I think everybody knows at least one person that's kind of like this lady here, with her piercings and the various colored hair and the style and the tattoos and everything like that. So these people will tend to be fantasy prone. They're very open to their feelings and different and diverse behaviors, which I think we can definitely see in her outfit and hairstyle and everything like that. Open to different ideas, new ideas, and open to values and beliefs. These are the type of people who they very well might go off and experience different things that other people might not. They might want to go and apply to take a job in Antarctica or in the jungle or whatever, something like that. These are the type of people that if I said, hey, I'm going skydiving next weekend, you want to come? They're probably going to be willing to join me anyway. Conscientiousness. These are the people who are very competent and orderly. They are the ones who are paying attention to things. These are the people who are, who have their stuff planned out. They've read the syllabus before class. They're not going to bother the teacher with stupid questions that have already been discussed, unless there's an actual problem, because they're already aware. These are the people who most likely are going to have their papers in early, and these people are the ones that go farthest in life. People that are not doing this, you're honestly going to be really grateful if you pass the class. And like I said, these are the people who also, if in college at the very least, these are the people who can easily pull, 18, 20, 22 credit hours. Because they can do it, just because they're very together. This is the one that's linked to the best quality of life. So, quite frankly, if you guys are so are having situations where you're not showing a lot of conscientiousness, be aware of what this means to you and your future career, because you're less likely to get a job or to keep your job if you don't show this. Extroversion. Don't ask me why. They have Bill Clinton. I'm not sure he was a real extrovert, but hey, whatever. But they do tend to be warm, assertive, and active. These people are probably suffering greatly during various forms of lockdown that we have from time to time. But they're also very linked to being able to go and have excitement. They may also join me when I go skydiving. The trait of agreeableness, there is still a little bit of crossoverness with a little bit of openness and a little bit of extroversion, but they are very distinct traits too. People who are agreeable will tend to be very trusting, very modest, and will still be kind of straightforward. Very nice people to have. They're also more willing to help you. And if you experience somebody like this, they may also have issues saying no. I had a friend who I was very close with for a number of years, and that was her biggest thing. She could never, ever say no to somebody. And what she did, one time had such a bad issue that I ended up having to tell her, having to basically do therapy with her for about 2 hours, starting at 12:30 at night once. And she kept saying with this story, well, what would you do in this case? Oh, I'd help them. What would you do in this case? Oh, I'd help them. Because it turned out she was scared of not helping them, scared of some type of threat that she was going to have or something like that. Ended up with a story that went on for 2 hours. So finally she was even scared of every time she said, oh, I'm scared of that person, I made this person have more problems. Like she said, she was scared that somebody could get up and like shoot her. Now the person doesn't have any arms or legs, and there's nothing there. You can't shoot somebody if you're completely disabled. But it did become a much more unusual story, and she still 2 hours later, this crazy this crazy hypothetical situation, she still wouldn't say no. But I did get her laughing, but still, she is so overly agreeable. And she's now a ER physician down in Miami, so I guess if you ever want pain medications, well, go down and do that, because she's going to give it to you, because she hasn't still broken that. So facets of traits. Neuroticism. Here we are, Woody Allen. He always plays the same characters, usually a neurotic Jew. People who are high in neuroticism, they're more likely to be angry, anxious, depressed, self-conscious, paranoid. They may think that everybody is listening to them. No, I guarantee you, usually most people are not. They think all ears are on them, all eyes are on them. Hey, just remember, just because a potato has eyes and a corn has ears does not mean that they're watching you or listening to you. Just a note. But there are other traits beyond this 5-factor model. If you look at the Eysenck emphasis, that's really more focused on extroversion and neuroticism. If you look at the Hexco model, that's really looking at basically all the ocean traits, but also this honesty and humility thing. How honest you are versus how manipulative and self-centered you are. So that could be a very interesting thing to look at, especially as it pertains to politicians. There are traits beyond this 5-factor model, of course. Machiavellism, willingness to manipulate, deceive. There's also stuff like the need for achievement. So that's actually the need to actually get your awards or whatnot, as opposed to anything else. it's not quite the need to be very dutiful, which is more like conscientiousness. Although conscientiousness also has sometimes can have this need for achievement. Certainly there's a lot of overlap. There's also basically a need to know, need for cognition, authoritarianism, lack of concern for others, narcissism, how important you think you are, and of course self-esteem and optimism. There's also this alexithymia, which is a difficulty in describing emotions. But when you look at all of these things together, you still see a lot of different personality traits as opposed to the personality themselves. And hopefully these traits can give you some idea as to how this person will act, although you'll probably never truly understand what their personality is. So here are some discussion questions. Yes, I know this lecture actually runs a little bit short because of the way that the activities are, and basically if you're doing this in a class, obviously you may want to pause and get more information about what each one of those pictures are and really have this time for a proper discussion. But anyway, here are some discussion questions. What are some characteristics of your personality? If you could change any aspect of your personality, what would it be? Has your personality changed over time? Why has it changed? Do you think it will change in the future? How might self-reporting be helpful in assessing personality? How might it be unhelpful? Do you feel that self-reports are generally reliable or unreliable, and why? Think about your parents and their personality. Are you similar or different from them? How were they like when they were kids? Is this something that might be more nature or nurture? Do all people have a combination of good and bad characteristics? Or are some people all good or all bad? How about Mother Teresa? How about Adolf Hitler? Do stars influence your personality? Of course, if you have any questions at all, email me, drop a comment, whatever you need to do. And I hope you enjoyed this lecture.